When 18-year-old Jake Mitchell walked onto the America's Got Talent stage wearing shoes held together with duct tape and a jacket that hadn't been washed in weeks, the judges exchanged worried glances. But what happened next left Simon Cowell speechless, brought tears to Sofia Vergara's eyes, and created a moment that would be replayed millions of times across the world. Jake's journey to that stage began in the darkest corners of London, where survival meant more than just finding your next meal. 3 years earlier, he was living in a cramped apartment with his mother, Rebecca Mitchell, a nurse who worked nights at a struggling hospital. Life wasn't easy, but they had each other, and Rebecca always said that Jake's voice was their ticket to something better. She would sit by his bedside every morning after his shift, exhausted but smiling, listening to him sing the songs she taught him when he was little. But life has a cruel way of testing those who least deserve it. When Jake was 15, Rebecca collapsed during her shift at the hospital. The doctor said it was a massive heart attack, brought on by years of stress, exhaustion, and a heart condition she never knew she had. In a matter of hours, Jake went from having a loving mother to having absolutely nothing. No father in the picture, no relatives who cared enough to take him in, and a social system that was already overwhelmed with cases like his. The foster homes came and went like a revolving door. The first family seemed kind enough, but their interest in Jake lasted exactly as long as the government checks. When those stopped coming regularly, so did their patience. Jake found himself bouncing between homes where he was either ignored completely or treated like an unwanted burden. In one particularly harsh placement with the Henderson family, Jake tried to sing to comfort himself during a panic attack. Mr. Henderson stormed into the room and screamed at him to shut up, saying nobody wanted to hear his pathetic noise. That was the night Jake decided he was better off alone. At 16 years old, with nothing but a backpack containing 2 changes of clothes and a photo of his mother, Jake walked out into the London streets and never looked back. What he didn't realize was that the real test of his character was just beginning. Living on the streets of London is a crash course in human cruelty and unexpected kindness. Jake learned to sleep with one eye open in doorways and underground passages. He discovered which restaurant managers would let him wash dishes for leftover food, and which ones would call the police just for asking. The winter months were the worst, when the cold seemed to seep into his bones and stay there, making every breath feel like swallowing knives. But here's where Jake's story takes an unexpected turn. During those long, lonely nights when hunger kept him awake and the cold made his teeth chatter, Jake would sing. Softly at first, so nobody would hear, but as the weeks turned into months, his voice grew stronger. The songs his mother taught him became his lifeline, the one thing that connected him to the warmth he used to know. Other homeless people began to gather around when he sang, and for a few minutes, the harsh reality of the streets would fade away. One evening, as Jake sat outside St. Paul's Cathedral singing Hallelujah to keep himself warm, something extraordinary happened. A crowd of tourists stopped to listen. Then more people joined. Within minutes, dozens of people had formed a circle around the skinny teenager, whose voice seemed to carry all the pain and hope in the world. When he finished, the silence lasted for several heartbeats before the applause erupted. People were crying, reaching into their pockets not just for spare change, but pulling out 20 and 50-pound notes. But Jake's breakthrough moment wasn't about the money. It was about the way people looked at him. For the first time in months, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't just another homeless kid to step around or ignore. He was someone whose gift had touched their hearts. An elderly woman named Margaret approached him after the crowd dispersed. She owned a small cafe nearby and had been watching from her window. She offered Jake a deal, a hot meal, and a place to clean up in exchange for singing for her customers once a week. Margaret's cafe became Jake's sanctuary. Every Tuesday evening, he would perform for the small crowd of regulars who came specifically to hear the boy with the golden voice. Margaret never made a big deal about it, but she always had a plate of food waiting and would slip him enough money for a hostel room when the weather got particularly brutal. She never asked questions about his past or preached about what he should do with his future. She simply gave him a stage and let his voice do the talking. It was at Margaret's cafe that Jake met Oliver Davis, an American music producer who was in London visiting his sister. Oliver had worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, but he later said that hearing Jake sing in that tiny cafe was the most powerful musical moment of his career. Oliver approached Jake after his performance, and what he said next would change everything. Oliver told Jake about America's Got Talent, about how the show was looking for authentic stories and incredible talent. But more importantly, he offered to help Jake get to America, to give him the chance that his circumstances had stolen from him. The catch was that Jake would have to leave everything familiar behind and trust a stranger with his future. For someone who had been let down by every adult in his life, this was asking the impossible. Jake spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about Oliver's offer. He walked the streets of London, visiting all the places that had become his world over the past 2 years. He sat outside the hospital where his mother had died, trying to imagine what she would tell him to do. The answer came to him as he sang her favorite lullaby under the stars. She would want him to be brave. She would want him to take the chance. The journey to America was like stepping into a different universe. Oliver arranged everything, from the visa paperwork to the plane ticket, but he made one thing clear to Jake. This wasn't charity. This was an investment. Oliver believed in Jake's talent, but success would require more than just a good voice. It would require the courage to stand in front of millions of people and bare his soul. The weeks leading up to the audition were a whirlwind of preparation and panic. Oliver set Jake up in a small apartment in Los Angeles and arranged for him to work with vocal coach named Patricia Williams. Patricia had trained Grammy winners and Broadway stars, but she said Jake's raw emotion was something that couldn't be taught. Their sessions focused not on changing his voice, but on helping him channel his experiences into his performance. But even with all the preparation, nothing could prepare Jake for the magnitude of walking onto that America's Got Talent stage. The theater was massive, filled with thousands of people, and the lights were so bright he could barely make out the judges' faces. His hands were shaking as he approached the microphone, and for a terrifying moment, he forgot why he was there. Then the music started. Jake had chosen to sing Somewhere from West Side Story, a song about hope and finding your place in the world. As the opening notes filled the theater, Jake closed his eyes and let himself remember everything. He remembered his mother's voice, singing him to sleep. He remembered the cold nights on the London streets when music was his only comfort. He remembered Margaret's kind eyes and Oliver's belief in his potential. When Jake opened his mouth and sang the first line, the entire theater fell silent. His voice was pure and powerful, carrying years of pain and hope in every note. By the time he reached the chorus, people in the audience were wiping away tears. Judge Sofia Vergara had her hand pressed to her heart, and even Simon Cowell, known for his harsh criticism, was leaning forward in his chair, completely captivated. But the real magic happened during the bridge of the song. Jake's voice soared to heights that seemed impossible, and in that moment, every person in that theater could feel his journey. They could hear the lonely nights, the struggle to survive, and the unwavering belief that something better was possible. When he hit the final note, the silence lasted for what felt like an eternity. Then the theater erupted. The entire audience was on their feet, screaming and crying and applauding with an intensity that none of the judges had ever seen before. Howie Mandel was wiping his eyes. Sophia was sobbing openly, and Simon stood up and began applauding, something he rarely did for auditions. But the moment that broke Jake completely was when he saw Oliver in the wings, tears streaming down his face, giving him a thumbs up. The judges' feedback was unanimous and unprecedented. Howie called it the most moving audition in the show's history. Sophia said Jake's voice had touched her soul, but it was Simon's response that everyone remembered. He stood up, looked directly at Jake, and said that in 30 years of judging talent, he had never heard a voice that carried so much authentic emotion and raw power. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the theater. He reached for his golden buzzer. As the golden confetti fell from the ceiling, and Jake stood in the center of that stage, overwhelmed by the love and support of thousands of strangers, he thought about how far he had come. 3 years ago, he was a broken kid sleeping in doorways, invisible to the world around him. Now he was standing on one of the biggest stages in entertainment, his voice having moved millions of people around the world. But Jake's story doesn't end with that golden buzzer moment, because the real victory wasn't about winning a competition or becoming famous. The real victory was about a young man who refused to let his circumstances define his destiny. He took every setback, every rejection, every cold night on the streets, and transformed them into fuel that powered his dreams. Jake's performance that night was watched by over 40 million people around the world. The video went viral within hours, accumulating millions of views and comments from people sharing their own stories of struggle and perseverance. But more importantly, Jake's journey inspired countless others who felt invisible, forgotten, or written off by society. Today, Jake continues to use his platform to advocate for homeless youth and to remind people that talent and worth aren't determined by your address or your circumstances. He established the Rebecca Mitchell Foundation, named after his mother, which provides music education and mentorship to young people in foster care and homeless shelters. Jake's story teaches us that sometimes our greatest struggles become our greatest strengths. The voice that carried him through those dark nights on London streets became the same voice that moved millions of hearts around the world. His journey reminds us that no matter how impossible our dreams might seem, no matter how many times we've been knocked down, we all have something unique and valuable to offer the world. The next time you feel like giving up, remember Jake Mitchell. Remember that the boy who was once invisible became impossible to ignore. Not because he was lucky, but because he never stopped believing in the power of his voice. Your voice matters too, whether it's literal or metaphorical, whether it sings or speaks or creates or builds. The world needs what you have to offer, even if you can't see it yet. Because sometimes all it takes is one note, one moment of courage, one decision to keep going, to change everything. And when that moment comes, you want to be ready to take the stage and show the world what you're truly capable of. Your golden buzzer moment is waiting. The only question is, are you ready to claim it?